We're here to talk about interior design trends, some that are in, and then even more that are out. That's Canadian for out. Out. How do Americans say out?
Get out. Get out.
I don't say oot, that's for sure. Welcome back to the channel. I'm James from The Paint People, and we talk about painting and decorating on this channel 6 times a week. Like the video if you like that, really appreciate it. Today we're gonna look at an article from my good friends over at insider.com. And the author of this article is Cheyenne Lentz, talking about interior design trends with a little bit of a theme of seasonal design. I love seasonal design. I love changing things up every season because in Canada, especially where I live, we get all 4 seasons. So we can kind of embrace the different vibes that each season brings. So I'm curious to see what she has to say about some of the choices. And I do understand that there are some more general design stuff that we go into as well. So I got my trusty black leather laptop, not sponsored. Let's get into it. First is jewel tones can create cozy vibes. I love a good cozy vibe, y'all. I also love jewel tones because what jewel tones are in the paint world are colors that look like gemstones, like emerald, sapphires, rubies, amethyst, pick your favorite. And with these colors, you get a ton of saturation. It doesn't always need to be just pure color. It's not always pure bright green. There can sometimes be a shaded aspect just on how paint is mixed. There can be some black in there. It should never really feel like an off black though. You still need to see the color hue being the most prominent part. But at the end of the day, these are big, bold, deep colors, really dark. And in this example here, there's an accent wall, at least one panel with that little bit of wainscoting has been painted green. And we definitely see a theme here, beige and green. Very nature, very organic. I'm all about that. It's funny because it says in this article, these tones create warmth in a room. Well, not if you're going with cold colors like sapphire's real blue. That's cold, man. But I get what they mean. There's something nice about seeing actual colors in the space, right? Not just gray and beige and white. That's also fine too, you know, to each their own. All right, next up, organic materials are replacing plastic decor pieces. Another continuation of the nature theme. And now instead of having fake stuff, you can have real plant life. I love plant life for so many reasons because it's just an easy way to incorporate pure color and not having to buy a can of paint. And it's something you can take care of if you're good at taking care of plants. If not, get a succulent, you'll be fine. But what's also another fun thing about plants is you can dress them up with fun little pots, like a little bit of terracotta, which is another big trending color, right? Terracottas and reds and all that. That's a great way to have the color of the year without using paint. So I find that a lot of people are using organic pots now too, or pots that are made with actual materials other than plastic. Wood and even bark and cork. There's a lot of cool stuff out there. I love it. Neutral living spaces infused with texture to keep things interesting. Now there's more than texture happening here in this picture, but I do get the crux of this thing. So yes, of course, there's really bright colors in the furniture, but the walls are a grayish. And then we have some layered rugs here that are also very gray leaning. So that is a very easy way to add some interest to an otherwise monochromatic or especially kind of grayscale neutral room is by incorporating different textures, different patterns, because that'll help break up the monotony of just off-white. But also, as we can see here, that's a little more than just texture, right? And those are bright colors. So some jewel tones I see, but I suppose that's another element that you can add on top of the jewel tones, for example, to create a more visually interesting look. Curves are replacing clean lines throughout home designs. Curves can also be clean lines. They're just curved. This makes sense to me. There's not as big of an emphasis on right angles, straight up and down lines and across and adjacent and all that, perpendicular. We're seeing a pull towards curves, rounded edges, softness, which also goes hand in hand with the colors that we're liking. They're more rounded, they're more likable, they're cozy, they're comforting. They're not as brutalist and overly modern and all that. Nice soft edges, very Scandi, very Japandi, all that fun stuff. Personally, I like to incorporate both. I like a bit of a mix. Maybe a round mirror with straight lines going up and down through it. You don't need to lean all the way in one way or another. It just depends on the piece, like the furniture or the accessory, whatever. But I do love poofs, and most of them are circular. Although I do have one that's kind of boxy, so what even would that be? Rounded square? Best of both worlds. Vintage pieces are replacing overly modern interiors. So I grew up in a household that had a ton of antiques. I know a little bit about them. especially French. French antiques are my mom's favorite. I do get the pull with vintage pieces because they tend to be more unique. They're not going to be cookie cutter, big box furniture that you see all over the place. They're naturally going to have character. They just offer you something different than what maybe your neighbor might have. No offense to them. There's also the aspect of hand-me-downs that maybe you inherited from your parents or your grandparents that you then incorporate into your decor, which is cool because now you have that personal touch as well as a pretty interesting piece of furniture. And with the good old internet, you don't need to go to auctions anymore to find awesome pieces. Now you can go online on Etsy and Wayfair. Maybe they won't always be actual legitimate antiques, but they can give you that effect. And then you can have it delivered to your house. Like, what a world we live in. I'm a fan of picking and choosing whenever I go with antiques or vintage stuff. Anything that I really love and gravitate towards and maybe has some sentimental value added on, even better, but just as a little seasoning to my design. I'm not going to overwhelm the space with a bunch of vintage stuff because then where do you look? There's too many cool little nuances to observe. It's good to have a few boring pieces too, is what I'm saying. And now let's talk about the stuff that is out. My favorite word. Out. Get out. Word art decor is out. Okay. But first, love. It's funny because when I got married, one of my good buddies told me, for your wedding, I'm going to buy you 10 farmhouse live, laugh, love signs. Because I know how much you love them. No, I mean, it's a certain aesthetic. If you love farmhouse, if you love motivational text, those affirmations, I'm not going to be mad at you for that. No, it's just not something you see in the trendy stores anymore. You just don't. So I guess if there's something that really means a lot to you, maybe have like one of those signs. Says welcome home on it. Create an atmosphere that gives the impression of a welcoming home. Maybe that's a good idea. And I'll leave that up to you to decide how to accomplish that. Okay, here it is. Seasonal decor is being replaced by timeless casual pieces. And there's a big X next to the pile of pumpkins. Curse you, Insider.com. Like I said in the beginning of the video, I'm not going to stop buying my seasonal stuff, especially Christmas. My wife and I love Christmas. One thing that I will take away from this is maybe you don't need to go as hard. You don't need to go as crazy, feeling like every month the temperature shifts, you gotta change out all your stuff. That's not the way to go for most people either. What I could recommend as a little suggestion here is when you are picking seasonal items, maybe don't go for the obvious choices like actual pumpkins. We found some really cool wooden pumpkins. It almost looks like the outline of a pumpkin, but it's whitewash bleach on the wood. That looks really cool. Stuff like that suits the rest of your decor. Elements that you can add to what is already there, so you're not pressured to just take everything away and then put new stuff in. The modern farmhouse style feels a bit dated and boring. I actually kind of like this example they used. I don't know why. I like the color of the wood. The tiles are a bit different, maybe a bit busy, but I think my only issue with modern farmhouse, and more specifically regular old farmhouse, is if you don't have a farmhouse. So if you're trying to force it and it doesn't really suit the architecture, then it can look a little bit, okay, you know, you're trying too hard. You're being too trendy. But if the building suits it, then you're just leaning into what's there. I think that's always a good choice. But I suppose the modern aspect here is what is a little bit questionable and maybe a little bit overdone. It does recommend as a replacement industrial as a good alternative. Still casual and comfortable, but a little more hip. And I mean, I'm in a pretty industrial basement right now. But at the same time, it's like, industrial can also be a little bit cold too, like, so it's not for everyone. And I did kind of force the industrial look here because I'm not sitting in an old shoe factory anymore. This is a very new basement. Although I left the exposed ceiling just for that sort of aesthetic. Sterile minimal interiors are trending down this season. They've been trending down for a little while now. I remember on YouTube, I just kept getting recommended all these minimalism videos. Minimalism, you know, like trim the fat, you know, just, you don't need all this stuff. All these people that were minimalists now are like, oh, you know, I got a couple things. You can't live in a white room forever. So I think now people realize that what may look good on Instagram isn't practical day to day. Cut out all the unnecessary stuff. New minimalism to me is minimizing the unnecessary stuff, which is cutting out all the clutter that maybe you don't need and just keep the really awesome stuff. That's kind of how I look at it now. Open floor plans are being replaced by designated spaces. This is another continuation of, you know, us being at home way more than we used to be and everything being everywhere all at once. But I think I talked about this before. If you have an open concept home, you don't need to feel pressure to build a wall, right? You can maybe move your furniture if you want a designated eating area and a designated hanging out area. I'd be curious to talk to some builders if they are seeing modern houses being a lot more compartmentalized like before, rather than just everything being out in the open. Could be fun to find out. And the last trend that is going out of style is over-embracing trends. An article all about trends is telling you, hey, don't worry about trends. Don't read this article. I guess what they're trying to say is like, don't feel pressure to just dive into some really cool new thing or a really popular thing like terrazzo tile, for example. This speckly stuff, which has been around for a long time, but now it's just really caught on. There's a good chance that if you just dive in too hard and just replace your entire kitchen with this stuff, probably won't last long. But I do have some strong feelings about following trends too hard, and it's right over here in this video. A little more ranty, a little more off the cuff, kind of like this one. So I think you'll probably like it. And also, if you haven't already, click the subscribe button because we make 6 videos a week. Stay up to date, because I could use the company. Pretty lonely down in this basement.